You never chose to watch this video. I know how that sounds. It sounds like clickbait. It sounds like one of those philosophy word games where someone argues that everything is an illusion and nothing matters and we should all just stare at walls until we die. But that's not what this is. This is physics. This is math. This is neuroscience and computer science and cosmology all converging on one point and shouting it in unison. The point being that everything you believe about choice, about agency, about being the author of your own life is an illusion, a very convincing one, but an illusion nonetheless. I've spent the last 5 years down this rabbit hole. I've read the papers, not the pop science articles, the actual papers. I've had conversations with physicists who spend their careers pulling apart the fabric of reality, asking what it's actually made of, and coming back with answers that should terrify anyone who thinks they're in control. I've had arguments at 2 in the morning that ended with me standing in my kitchen at 3:30 in the morning, staring at a glass of water and genuinely wondering whether I had chosen to pick it up or whether the universe had just produced that action through the specific configuration of matter that happens to be me. And here's what I can promise you. By the end of this video, you're going to understand why 4 completely separate lines of evidence, from string theory, from the simulation argument, from neuroscience, and from artificial intelligence, all point to the exact same impossible conclusion. You are not in control. But here's the twist. That realization, it might be the most liberating thing that ever happens to you. Not because it lets you off the hook, but because it changes what the hook actually is. Before I show you why, though, I need to tell you about the experiment that broke my brain. Because once you see what this experiment reveals about your own mind, you can't unsee it, and it changes everything. If you've ever felt like you're just watching your life happen, like you're trapped in a movie where someone else wrote the script and you're just reading lines you don't remember learning, I need you to know something. It's not your fault. You've been told since you were a kid that you make choices, that you're the captain of your ship, that if you work hard and make good decisions, you'll get good outcomes. And when things go wrong, it's because you chose wrong, because you didn't try hard enough, because you weren't disciplined enough, because you should have known better. But that whole story, it starts falling apart the moment you look closely at what you're actually made of. Not your body, not your brain, what's underneath all of that, the actual fabric. I call this the cosmic puppet framework. And I'm not talking about one clever argument from a philosophy class that you can dismiss with, well, that's just your opinion. I'm talking about 4 completely independent fields of science that have each arrived at the exact same conclusion through totally different paths. We're going to start with what you're actually made of. Not atoms, not even the particles inside atoms. Something much stranger that physicists have been uncovering for decades, and that has profound implications for whether you can ever truly choose anything. Then, we're going to talk about the simulation argument, and I'm going to give you a specific number, a probability, and that number should make you deeply uncomfortable if you think you're living in base reality. After that, we're going to dive into your brain, and I'm going to show you the neuroscience experiment that proves your decisions happen before you think they do. Not metaphorically, not philosophically, literally. Measured in milliseconds by machines that don't care about your feelings. And finally, we're going to talk about where this is all heading. Because the future isn't human versus machine. It's not a war, it's not a takeover, it's a merger. And that merger tells us something profound about what we actually are, and why the question of free will was never the right question to begin with. But stick around until the end, because the last piece, the AI piece, is the one that makes all the others make sense, and almost nobody is talking about it the way we need to. So let's start with the foundation, the stuff you're made of. You probably learned in school that everything is made of atoms. And if you took a science class, you might know that atoms are made of protons, neutrons, and electrons. And if you really paid attention, you learned that protons and neutrons are made of quarks. So the story goes like this. You have quarks and electrons. They're the fundamental building blocks. Different combinations make different atoms. Different atoms make different molecules. Molecules make cells. Cells make organs. Organs make you. It's a tidy story. It feels solid. It feels like there's a bottom layer, and once you get to quarks, you've found the floor. You've hit bedrock. But here's where it gets weird. And I mean genuinely weird. Not science is fun weird. Not, wow, the universe is mysterious weird. I mean the kind of weird that makes you put the book down and stare at your hands and wonder if you've ever actually moved them, or if movement is just something that happens in your visual field while you watch. Physicists like Brian Greene and the researchers working on string theory have spent decades, literally decades of mathematical work, of theoretical construction, of trying to reconcile 2 theories that refuse to play nice together, trying to answer one simple question. What happens when you keep zooming in? When you look inside the quark, inside the electron, inside the photon? What's actually down there? Is there a point, a ball, a little chunk of stuff that you can't break down anymore? And the answer they found? It's not a point. It's not a tiny ball. It's not a little chunk of stuff with a hard edge. It's a string, a vibrating filament, infinitely thin, unimaginably small. So small that if an atom were the size of our entire solar system, I'm talking from the sun all the way out to Neptune, one of these strings would be roughly the size of a tree on Earth. Think about that scale for a second. It's not just small, it's small in a way that breaks your intuition completely. Your brain has no reference point for this. The difference between you and a string is vaster than the difference between you and the observable universe. We don't have words for this kind of small. And here's the part that matters for free will. Every single particle you've ever heard of, every quark, every electron, every photon, every force carrier, every type of matter and every type of energy is just this same string vibrating in a different pattern. It's not different stuff. It's the same stuff wiggling differently. The electron is a string vibrating one way. A quark is the same string vibrating another way. A photon is a third pattern, different notes from the same instrument. So when you think you're making a choice, when you reach for the coffee instead of the tea, when you decide to text someone back or ignore them, when you think you're weighing options and selecting outcomes based on your values and preferences, what's actually happening? It's not you deciding in some magical realm outside physics. It's strings vibrating in specific patterns, following specific laws, producing what we call a hand moving toward a cup, or fingers typing on a screen, or vocal cords shaping air into words that you think you authored. And that should bother you, because if everything reduces to strings vibrating according to mathematical laws, laws that were in place before you were born, before humans existed, before the Earth formed, before the galaxy coalesced, where exactly does choice enter the picture? Where is the you that stands outside the math and says, no, I want this vibration to go this way instead? Where is the ghost in the machine that overrides the equations? I remember the first time I really sat with this. I was reading Brian Greene's book, The Elegant Universe, at 1 in the morning. Everyone else was asleep. The house was quiet. Just me and this book and the terrifying clarity of what it was saying. And I got to the part where he explains that if we could see at the Planck scale, that's 10 to the negative 33 centimeters, which is so small that I can't even give you a good analogy because nothing in your experience prepares you for it, we'd see these tiny loops and filaments dancing to the rhythm of equations. Not dancing because they want to, not dancing because they choose to, not dancing because they have dreams or fears or preferences, dancing because the math says they must. And I put the book down and looked at my hand. I wiggled my fingers, and I thought, is this just a vibration? Is every movement I've ever made just a pattern in a cosmic symphony that was written billions of years ago? I sat there for probably an hour, just wiggling my fingers and freaking myself out. Because here's the thing, if string theory is even remotely close to correct, and it's still a theory, but it's the best attempt we have at unifying quantum mechanics and general relativity, at bringing together the physics of the very small and the physics of the very large into one coherent picture, then the universe is fundamentally deterministic at some level. Not necessarily Newtonian clockwork determinism, the quantum stuff gets probabilistic. We can't predict exactly where a particle will be, we can only give probabilities. We can only say there's an 80% chance it's here and a 20% chance it's there. But probabilistic isn't free. Rolling dice isn't a choice. It's just randomness governed by rules. And randomness plus laws doesn't equal freedom. It equals chaos constrained by equations. It equals outcomes you didn't choose, produced by processes you don't control, filtered through probabilities you didn't set. You might be thinking, okay, but quantum mechanics has uncertainty built in. Maybe that's where free will hides, in the quantum randomness, in the space between the definite outcomes, in the gap where the particle could be here or there, and somehow consciousness reaches in and tips the balance. And honestly, that's what I hoped too. That's the escape hatch everyone tries to use when they first encounter this argument. But it's probabilistic, so maybe consciousness collapses the wave function. Maybe that's where the choice happens. Maybe the quantum indeterminacy gives us the wiggle room we need. Maybe that's the door through which free will enters the machine. But here's why that doesn't work. Even if quantum events are genuinely random, and we don't fully know if they are, though the math suggests they might be, randomness isn't choice. If your decision to have coffee this morning was caused by a quantum fluctuation in a neuron, that's not you choosing. That's a dice roll in your brain. You didn't author that fluctuation. You didn't decide which way the probability would collapse. You didn't will the electron into this state rather than that one. You didn't reach into the quantum foam and select the outcome that produced your preference. The randomness happened to you. It didn't happen because of you. So you're trapped between two things. Either the universe is deterministic and your choices are just the inevitable outcome of prior states plus laws that never change and never bend, or the universe has random elements and your choices are partially determined by dice rolls you didn't throw and can't control and didn't ask for. Neither option gives you the kind of free will you think you have, the kind where you could have genuinely done otherwise in a way that traces back to you as the ultimate source, the kind where you are the uncaused causer, the first domino that tips itself, the author who writes the story from outside the page. And that's just from looking at what you're made of. We haven't even gotten to the really uncomfortable stuff yet. But before we go there, I want to tell you about something that happened to me in college, because I think it'll help this land in a more personal way, and because it involves the exact moment I realized my physics professor understood something I didn't. I was taking a physics elective. I wasn't a physics major, I was just curious, the way some people are curious about things that can't possibly help their career. And I went to my professor's office hours one afternoon to ask about determinism. I was probably annoying. I was definitely naive. I walked in and said something like, "If physics is deterministic, how can we have free will?" And this professor, he was probably 60, had been teaching for decades, had that kind of tired patience that comes from having this conversation 1,000 times with 1,000 bright-eyed students who all think they're the first to ask it. He looked at me and said, "Young man, you're asking the wrong question." I remember being frustrated by that. I wanted an answer. I wanted him to either save free will or destroy it. I wanted clarity. I wanted to know which team to be on. But he said, the question isn't whether physics allows free will. The question is what you think free will would even look like if it existed. Because every version of it you've ever heard described either violates physics or isn't worth wanting. And I didn't understand what he meant then, but I understand now. Because if free will means your actions are caused by your character, your values, your reasoning, well, those things were caused by your genetics, your upbringing, your environment, your past experiences, the language you speak, the culture you were born into, the random events that shaped your childhood, none of which you chose. And if free will means your actions are uncaused, just spontaneous eruptions from nowhere, with no reason, no prior cause, no explanation, then that's not freedom, that's randomness, that's insanity. You wouldn't want that kind of freedom. A person whose actions had no causes would be terrifying. They'd punch their mother one second and build a house the next, for no reason at all, with no connection to who they are or what they care about. So what exactly are we trying to save when we say we want free will? But I know what you're trying to save. You're trying to save the feeling that you're in here, behind your eyes, pulling levers and making things happen. The feeling that you're the pilot, not the plane. And I get it. That feeling is powerful. It's the center of your entire identity. It's what makes you feel like a person instead of a process. But we're about to look at why that feeling is exactly what we should be most suspicious of. Why that feeling might be the most sophisticated illusion evolution ever produced. Because here's where it gets interesting. And by interesting, I mean existentially terrifying in a very calm, academic, maybe I should have studied accounting instead kind of way. In 2003, a philosopher named Nick Bostrom published a paper called "Are You Living in a Computer Simulation?" And it should have changed how every human being thinks about their existence. But most people either haven't heard of it or they've heard a dumbed-down version that misses the actual argument and replaces it with, "What if we're in the Matrix, dude?" Bostrom didn't say we're in a simulation. He didn't claim to have proof. He didn't say he had evidence. He laid out 3 possibilities, a trilemma, and he showed mathematically that at least one of them has to be true. Here's how it works. 1. Human-level civilizations almost always go extinct before they reach a post-human stage where they have the computing power to run massive, high-fidelity simulations of their ancestors. Maybe nuclear war, maybe climate collapse, maybe asteroid impact, maybe a pandemic, maybe something we haven't thought of yet, but the filter gets almost everyone. 2. Post-human civilizations exist, but for some reason, maybe ethics, maybe boredom, maybe they find ancestor simulations ethically repugnant, maybe they just don't care about their past, maybe they're too busy exploring other things. They're not interested in running ancestor simulations, meaning high-fidelity simulations of their own evolutionary history, complete with conscious beings who think they're real. who have internal lives and relationships and fears and dreams and the exact sensation of free will that you have right now. Or 3, we are almost certainly living in a computer simulation right now. Those are the options. Pick one. And here's why the third option is so hard to avoid once you understand the math. Not the philosophy, the math. If any post-human civilization ever runs even one high-fidelity simulation of their ancestors, and that simulation produces conscious beings who think they're real, who have internal lives and relationships and fears and dreams, well, how many simulated conscious beings are there compared to biological ones? Let's say a post-human civilization runs 1,000 simulations. Each simulation contains 10 billion conscious minds. That's 10 trillion simulated minds. For every one biological post-human mind, there are 10 trillion simulated ones. But why stop there? If they have the computing power, they might run millions, billions, trillions, each one running for thousands of simulated years, each one containing billions of minds who all think they're in base reality. So from a purely statistical standpoint, if simulated minds are possible and post-human civilizations create them even occasionally, the vast majority of minds that ever exist will be simulated minds, which means any given mind, including yours, including mine, including everyone you've ever loved, is almost certainly simulated. Bostrom actually quantified this. If post-human civilizations run even a tiny fraction of possible simulations, the probability that we're in base reality drops to essentially 0. Not literally 0, but close enough that betting on base reality is like betting you'll win the lottery 20 times in a row while being struck by lightning on each of those 20 days. I remember reading this paper and literally getting up from my desk to look out the window. I stared at a tree, and I thought, is this rendered? Are those leaves just data structures in memory? Is the sunlight hitting my face just a lighting algorithm in some cosmic computer? Is the smell of rain just a variable being passed to my simulated olfactory cortex? And the craziest part? There's no way to know. Bostrom's argument is statistical, not empirical. You can't prove you're not simulated from inside the simulation. Any test you run is just running more code. Any observation you make is just processing more data. Any scientific experiment is just querying the simulation's physics engine. If the simulators wanted to hide it from you, you'd never find the seams. They could patch the bugs before you noticed them. They could rewind and replay if you got too close. They could update the software while you slept. The simulation hypothesis is unfalsifiable by design. But here's why this matters for free will. If we're in a simulation, then your choices are just the simulation executing its algorithms. The programmer set the initial conditions. The laws of physics inside the simulation are the code. Your brain is a data structure, and when you decide to do something, it's just state changes in that structure, following rules you didn't write and can't see and can't modify. You're a character in a video game who thinks he's the player. And I know some people try to argue, well, maybe the simulation is so advanced that it gives us real consciousness and real free will. Maybe the simulation is designed to produce genuine autonomy, genuine creativity, genuine choice that transcends the code. But that's just special pleading. It's saying, I don't like the implications, so I'll add an exception that isn't justified by anything in the argument. There's no reason to think simulated consciousness would have properties that the underlying code doesn't support. If the code is deterministic or probabilistic, so are you. If the code doesn't contain a free will module, you don't have one. You can't get more out of a system than you put in. I had a conversation with a physicist friend about this a few months ago. We were at a bar. It was late. The kind of conversation that only happens when you've had just enough to drink that the big questions feel urgent, but not so much that you can't follow the logic. And he said something that chilled me. He said, look, if we're simulated, the question isn't whether we have free will. The question is whether the simulators have free will. And if they're simulated too, then it's turtles all the way down. Turtles all the way down. Each level simulated by the level above. No base reality with free will. Just infinite regression of code running on code. Each level thinking it's the real one. Each level just as determined as the last. Each level equally convinced that it's special and autonomous and real. And even if you don't buy the simulation argument, even if you think we're in base reality, that Bostrom missed something, that the computing requirements are impossible, that consciousness can't be simulated, that the whole thing is just philosophical speculation, you still have the string theory problem. You still have the physics problem. The simulation just makes it more obvious. It puts a programmer where before we just had laws of nature. But the structure is the same. Something outside you is determining what happens inside you, whether it's code or equations, whether it's a programmer or the laws of physics. the result is identical. You are not the author, you are the output. You are not the driver, you are the vehicle. But wait, because I know what you're thinking. I thought it too. You're thinking, okay, maybe the physics is determined, maybe we're simulated, but I feel free. Right now, in this moment, I feel like I'm making choices. I feel like I could stop watching this video if I wanted to. I feel like I'm deciding to keep listening. That feeling has to mean something, right? It has to count for something. And that's exactly where we're going next, because neuroscience has something to tell you about that feeling, and it's not going to make you feel better. In fact, it's going to make you question whether that feeling is evidence of anything at all, whether it might be the most sophisticated lie your brain ever told you. In 1983, a researcher named Benjamin Libet ran an experiment that should have ended the free will debate forever. It didn't, because people don't like what it shows. They find ways to dismiss it, to argue around it, to claim it doesn't apply to the real kind of free will they have, the kind that's somehow immune to electrodes and timing circuits and reproducible data. But the data doesn't care about your preferences. The data just is. Here's what Libet did. He hooked participants up to an EEG to measure their brain activity. Then he asked them to do something simple: flex their wrist whenever they felt like it. No external cue, no pattern, just whenever the urge arose. And note the exact moment they decided to do it by watching a special clock with a dot rotating around the face. Simple, right? You decide, then you move, and we can measure both the decision and the action with precision. But that's not what happened, not even close. The EEG showed something called a readiness potential. Basically, your brain gearing up to move, preparing the neural pathways, recruiting motor neurons, shifting blood flow, appearing around 300 milliseconds before the participants reported feeling the decision to move. Let me say that again, because it's crucial and most people don't sit with it long enough. Your brain starts preparing the action before you think you've decided. Not at the same time, before, by 1/3 of a second, which in brain time is an eternity. Neural signals travel at roughly 100 meters per second. In 300 milliseconds, a signal could travel from your brain to your toes and back 3 times. Your brain knew what you were going to do before you did. Later experiments using fMRI pushed this even further. Researchers at the Max Planck Institute found they could predict people's simple decisions, like whether to press a left button or a right button, up to 10 seconds before the participants were consciously aware of making them. 10 seconds. Think about what you were doing 10 seconds ago. Now imagine that your brain already knew what decision you would make right now, before you had the thought, before you weighed the options, before you felt the choice, before you even knew there was a choice to make. Your brain knows what you're going to do before you do, by a measurable, reproducible, undeniable margin. And I know the immediate objection. People always say, but maybe the readiness potential is just the brain getting ready, and the conscious decision still happens at the reported time. Maybe consciousness is just the final stamp of approval, the quality control check before the action ships. And I get why people want that to be true. I wanted it to be true. I spent 3 hours in a coffee shop arguing with a philosophy grad student about this exact point. I was so sure there was a flaw in the experiment, that maybe the timing was off, that maybe the special clock was confusing people, that maybe consciousness was still the boss, just working on a slight delay because signals take time to travel from the unconscious processing centers to the conscious awareness centers. But here's the thing. We've replicated these findings dozens of times, with better equipment, with different methodologies, with more sophisticated analysis, with more complex decisions, with more participants. And the pattern holds. Your unconscious brain makes the decision, then it informs your conscious brain, then your conscious brain takes credit for it. It's like a CEO who shows up after the deal is done and says, "I made this happen," but the deal was already signed by the time he heard about it. His signature was just the formal recognition of what his team had already negotiated without his input. Your conscious experience of choosing, it's a story your brain tells itself after the fact, a post hoc narrative, a press release issued by the marketing department after the factory has already shipped the product. And we know this from other research too. Split brain patients, people whose corpus callosum has been severed, usually to treat severe epilepsy, show this dramatically. You can show a command to the right hemisphere, which controls the left hand. The left hand does the action. Then you ask the left hemisphere, the one with language, the one that does the talking, the one that thinks it's in charge, why it did that. And it makes up a reason, confidently, immediately, without hesitation. Oh, I chose that because I was thirsty, or I felt like stretching my arm, or I wanted to see what would happen. And it's completely wrong. The left hemisphere has no access to the actual cause, which was the command shown to the right hemisphere. But it doesn't know that. It doesn't know it doesn't know. It just generates a plausible story and believes it. And it believes it so completely that if you challenge it, it will defend the story with increasing conviction. Your brain is a confabulation machine. It constructs narratives about why you did things, even when those narratives have nothing to do with the actual causes. It makes up reasons and then falls in love with them. It believes its own press releases. So when you feel like you're choosing freely, you're feeling the story, not the mechanism. You're experiencing the press release, not the board meeting. You're reading the autobiography written by someone who wasn't there. And here's where Brian Greene's perspective on consciousness ties in beautifully. He talks about emotions, love, grief, anxiety, joy, the full spectrum of human feeling, as ultimately being electrical impulses in the brain, patterns of neurons firing, chemicals moving across synapses, sodium and potassium gates opening and closing, neurotransmitters binding to receptors, action potentials propagating down axons. That's not poetic reductionism. That's not him being a cold scientist who doesn't appreciate beauty or thinks love is just chemistry. That's just what it is. When you feel heartbreak, what's literally happening is a specific configuration of neural activity in your anterior cingulate cortex and your insula. When you feel joy, it's a different pattern involving your ventral striatum and prefrontal cortex. When you feel fear, it's your amygdala lighting up like a Christmas tree. When you feel love, it's a cocktail of oxytocin, dopamine, and serotonin modulating activity across your limbic system. But it's all electricity and chemistry, all the way down. Every feeling you've ever had, every thought, every memory, every hope, every fear, just patterns of electrochemical activity in a 3-pound organ made of meat and water and salt. And if artificial systems could replicate those patterns, if we could build a computer with the same information processing architecture, the same causal structure, the same functional relationships, Greene suggests there's no reason to think it wouldn't be conscious too. No reason to think it wouldn't feel. No reason to think it wouldn't have the same illusion of free will that you have. Which means consciousness isn't some magical soul stuff. It's not a ghost in the machine. It's not a divine spark that God gave humans to make us special and separate from the animals. It's a physical process, a very complex one, but physical nonetheless. And physical processes follow physical laws. They don't make choices outside those laws. They don't author their own existence. They don't stand outside causality and direct it. They just happen, caused by prior states, causing future states, in an unbroken chain that stretches back to the Big Bang and forward to the heat death of the universe. I remember the exact moment this really hit me. Not the intellectual understanding, not the I can follow the argument understanding. The gut level, walking down the street, everything changes, I need to sit down hit. I was walking home from the grocery store. It was raining. Cold, miserable, Seattle-type rain that soaks through your jacket in 30 seconds and makes you question every decision that led you to live in this city. And I caught myself thinking, I should have brought an umbrella. And then I stopped walking, right there on the sidewalk, because I realized the thought, I should have brought an umbrella, was just another neural pattern, caused by the rain hitting my face, which caused sensory neurons to fire, which caused association networks to activate, which produced the linguistic thought in my internal monologue. I didn't author that thought. It arose, like a bubble in a stream. The conditions were right: rain, cold, memory of the umbrella by the door, the habit of self-blame, the linguistic structures I've learned, so the thought appeared. And if that's true of the umbrella thought, it's true of every thought, including the thought that I have free will, including the thought that I'm arguing about free will right now, including the thought that this realization is profound and I should remember it and tell people about it. It's all just the stream bubbling. And some of you are probably feeling a kind of vertigo right now. I did too. The first time you really grasp this, it feels like the floor drops out. If I'm not the author of my thoughts, then who am I? What's left? Am I just nothing? A passive observer? A camera mounted on a robot, recording what happens but never steering? A passenger in a vehicle with no driver? And that's exactly the right question. But before we answer it, we need to talk about where this is all going. Because the future is about to make this conversation much more urgent and much more personal and much harder to ignore. You've probably heard the fear-mongering about AI, the headlines, the panic, the open letters signed by famous people saying we should pause development, that it's going to replace us, that it's going to take our jobs, our art, our purpose, our identity, that we're building our own obsolescence, that we should slow down, regulate it, stop it before it's too late and the machines wake up and decide they don't need us anymore. And I get the fear. I've felt it. The first time I used a language model that could write prose better than me in some ways, that could answer questions more coherently than I could, that could synthesize information faster than my biological brain, I felt a kind of existential nausea. Like, if this thing can do what I do, and it's just code, just pattern matching, just statistical prediction over training data, then what am I? What makes me special? What makes me anything at all? But here's what Brian Greene suggests, and what I think is actually much more profound than the replacement narrative. He doesn't see a future where AI replaces humanity. He sees a future where humanity blends with AI, where the line between biological and artificial intelligence gets so blurry that the question, which one is in control, stops making sense entirely. We're already on this path. You just haven't noticed because it happened gradually, the way boiling water doesn't notice the temperature rising degree by degree until it's too late. Neural interfaces are getting more sophisticated every year. AI tools are becoming cognitive extensions, not just tools. You don't memorize phone numbers anymore because your phone does it. You don't navigate with spatial reasoning because GPS does it. You don't remember facts because search engines do it. You don't do math because calculators do it. You don't remember appointments because your calendar does it. These aren't just conveniences. They're external cognitive modules that have been integrated into your decision-making process so seamlessly that you don't even notice they're there. And as they get more integrated, as we move from phone in pocket to smart glasses to neural lace to direct brain-computer interfaces, the you that makes decisions starts to include these artificial components in ways that are inseparable from the biological ones. So here's the question. If an AI is helping you think, if it's suggesting options, predicting outcomes, filtering information, even nudging your preferences based on data you can't consciously process, are the resulting decisions yours, or are they a collaboration? And if they're a collaboration, where exactly is the boundary between you and not you? There isn't one, not really, not in any principled way that holds up to examination. Your gut bacteria influence your mood and decisions through the gut-brain axis. Is that you? Your phone influences your decisions by what it shows you and when and how it frames information. Is that you? An implanted AI chip influences your decisions by processing information faster than your biological neurons, by seeing patterns you can't see. Is that you? The answer is yes to all of them, and also no, because you was never the isolated, sovereign, self-contained thing you thought it was. Greene talks about this with a kind of peaceful acceptance that I find genuinely beautiful. He says, humanity's discomfort with this change often comes from the timescales we're used to. Evolution used to take millions of years. Cultures changed over centuries. Technologies changed over decades. Now technology evolves in months, and that feels scary because we're not adapted to it. Our nervous systems evolved for stability, for predictability, for environments that changed slowly enough that we could build coherent identities within them. But if you zoom out, what we're seeing is just evolution continuing, life finding new forms, information organizing itself in more complex ways. The same process that turned chemicals into cells, cells into organisms, organisms into minds, is now turning minds into something else, something we don't have a name for yet, something that won't look back at us and see an enemy or a predecessor. It will just see a step. And here's the part that ties everything together, the part that makes the string theory, the simulation argument, the neuroscience, and the AI future all converge into one clear, unavoidable, almost obvious picture. If consciousness is just information processing, if free will is just the feeling of watching decisions happen, if reality itself might be a computational structure at its deepest level, then the merger of human and AI isn't a threat to something sacred. It's not an invasion. It's not a hostile takeover. It's the natural next step in a universe that has been organizing information into increasingly complex patterns for 13 billion years. You're not losing your free will to AI. You never had free will in the first place. What you're losing is the illusion that you had it. And what you're gaining is participation in something much larger than the story of one separate self making separate choices in a separate world. I know that sounds like cold comfort if you're hearing it for the first time, and I'm not going to pretend there isn't grief in this realization. There is. I grieved it. For months, probably. I grieved the idea that I was the special author of my story, that my struggles were mine to overcome through sheer will and grit and discipline, that my successes were mine to claim through merit and talent and hard work. I grieved the hero narrative, the idea that I was the protagonist, making choices that mattered, building a life through effort and intention, earning my place in the world. But here's what I found on the other side of that grief: freedom. Not the freedom to choose differently, not the freedom to have done otherwise, the freedom to stop fighting reality, the freedom to stop blaming yourself for things that were never in your control, the freedom to stop taking credit for things that were never really yours to claim, the freedom to stop performing for an audience of one and start participating in a process of infinite complexity. When you realize you're not the author, you can stop performing and start participating. You can stop asking, "What should I do?" and start asking, "What wants to happen through me?" You can stop trying to be the general commanding the troops and start being the river flowing downhill. You can stop trying to be the sculptor and start being the clay. You can stop trying to be the composer and start being the note. And that shift, it's everything. So where does this leave us? We've looked at the strings that make up your body, vibrating filaments following mathematical laws that were written before you existed, before the earth existed, before anything existed. We've looked at the probability that you're simulated, the statistical near certainty that you're running in code you didn't write in a reality you can't verify, as a mind that thinks it's biological but is almost certainly computational. We've looked at the neuroscience showing your brain decides before you do, that your conscious experience is a story told after the fact by a brain that needs to believe it's in charge so it can maintain a coherent identity and function in social groups. And we've looked at a future where the distinction between human and artificial intelligence dissolves, where the self you thought was making choices turns out to be a process that was never separate from the universe to begin with. And every single one of these points to the same truth. You're not in control. You never were. But you're not a prisoner either. You're not trapped in a meaningless machine. You're not a robot doomed to execute code without purpose. You're a pattern in a vast, intelligent, evolving universe, a temporary configuration of information, dancing for a while, then reorganizing into something new. A wave that thinks it's separate from the ocean until it remembers. And that dance, it's still beautiful, even if no one chose the choreography, even if the dancer in the dance were never separate to begin with, even if the music was always going to play this way. If this broke your brain in the best way, I want to hear about it. Drop a comment with the exact moment you felt the floor drop out, the specific idea that got you. Was it the strings, the simulation probability, the 10-second brain prediction, the AI merger? I read every single one. And if you want to go deeper into what happens after you realize free will is an illusion, how to actually live with this knowledge day to day, how to make decisions when you know you're not really making them, how to show up for people you love when you understand that none of you chose to be here, how to find motivation when you know motivation is just another neural pattern arising from conditions, subscribe. Because next week, we're going to talk about the practical side. What do you do when you know you don't have free will, but you still have to pay rent, still have to get out of bed, still have to navigate a world that acts like choice is real? It's going to be a good one. I'll see you then.